We'll get to education in a minute, but I just want to start with Ukraine, and in particular those comments by President Joe Biden. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power. Does the UK government also think that Putin has to go?
I think that's up to the Russian people. The Russian people, I think, are pretty fed up with what is happening in Ukraine, this illegal invasion, the destruction of their own livelihoods, their economy is collapsing around them. And I think the Russian people will decide the fate of Putin and his cronies. The important thing to remember is that there is evidence that war crimes have been committed in the Ukraine, targeting of civilian areas in the Ukraine. And you will know that the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, has been working with the International Criminal Court to make sure that that evidence is well documented, well collected, so that those who commit war crimes know that there will be a day of reckoning.
I mean, you're very clear, aren't you, in saying that it's for the Russian people to decide who their president is. It's not helpful, is it, as a comment from Joe Biden? I mean, US presidents calling for regime change doesn't always end well.
Well, I think the White House has been very clear after that speech, which was a very powerful speech by President Biden, talking about
contradict what he said on.
Well, they've been clear that actually it is an illegal invasion of the Ukraine, and that must end. And I think that's what the president is talking about. I think it's right that it is for the Russian people to decide how they are governed. I suspect, as I say to you, many of them will have friends, indeed family, that are Ukrainians, and having innocent Ukrainians murdered by Putin and his regime is not something that sits well with the Russian people either. So I think it's important to remember that they will decide that, they will make that decision ultimately.
So he was wrong to say that?
No, what I'm saying to you is the White House has been very clear on this. The president gave a very powerful speech on this. And I think it's, both the United States and the United Kingdom agree that it's up to the Russian people to decide who should be governing them. They would certainly do well to have someone that is democratic and understand their wishes. I suspect the majority of Russians see the invasion as illegal and want this war to end.
Now, there's been talk this week that Russia might be scaling back its ambition in Ukraine, that the Defence Ministry is saying its main goal was the liberation of the Donbass region in the east. What's your latest intelligence about what is actually happening on the ground in Ukraine?
Well, clearly, the Russian military has miscalculated. I think the initial sort of shock and awe of taking the whole of Ukraine has not worked for them. The Ukrainians have fought like lions. They've defended their country. They believe in their freedom. They believe in justice and the rule of law and their democracy, which is why I think the Russian military have found it much tougher, and they're losing tens of thousands of innocent young men who've been sent to the front line, not knowing why they're invading a neighbouring country that is democratic. And I think they're paying the price.
And there may be a change of strategy then, you think?
Well, clearly, if you look at the Ministry of Defence's assessment that we're putting out, they're having real problems.
Now, Liz Truss has told the Sunday Telegraph today that sanctions on Russia should only come off after a full ceasefire and withdrawal from Ukraine. So do you think that's a condition of any sort of peace deal? Is that what we're starting to move towards?
It has to be. Any peace deal has to take into account the wish of the free Ukrainian people. And I also think President Zelensky is right about this, that any serious peace deal has to be negotiated face-to-face between President Zelensky and Putin. That is the only way Putin is going to be serious about this. I think the only thing that the regime understands is the strength of the military response from the Ukrainian military and, of course, the strength and resolve of the Ukrainian people. So I think President Zelensky is absolutely right. All this stuff will not be taken seriously by him or the Ukrainian people unless Putin's prepared to sit down with him.
And just to be clear then, no sanctions coming off until there's a full ceasefire and withdrawal?
Absolutely right. I think the Russian illegal invasion has to end, and the Russian army has to leave the Ukraine. And it's up to the Ukrainian people. They must be very much the ones who decide what that peace looks like.
Now, just to kind of take a step back for a minute, we've seen millions of people displaced from Ukraine, families, children. You, of course, came to the UK your family from Saddam Hussein's Iraq when you were a boy. You've always said that you were not refugees but immigrants, but at the same time, you were a boy, you didn't speak the language. Does it bring back, I guess, memories? And how do you feel some of those children must be feeling? You see them moving across continents, being thrust into different places.
Very much so. It's a combination of anger, loss, huge loss, because you're ripped away from all those things that you held dear and those sort of protective layers of family and home. And you don't understand why this is happening to you. And so I absolutely feel that, which is why my department has made preparations to take up to 100,000 Ukrainian children into our education system, from early years to primary to secondary, of course, to colleges and universities. And we will deliver that. We did it for the Afghan resettlement scheme. We're doing it with the Hong Kongers. 104,000 have applied to settle here as well.
How did you feel then as a sort of 11-year-old boy not speaking English?
Fear. The first few weeks, I sat at the back of the classroom. I hid at the back of the classroom because children can be cruel. I tried to string words together in my head, the few words I knew, as I began to obviously read and write, to try and make a sentence to join in the subject matter. But when I'd made that sentence, the subject matter had moved on. So the early few weeks, my teachers thought I had learning difficulties, which is why our green paper is so important next week, but also our white paper as well, because my parents understood the value of education. My mother used to always say, it will unlock opportunities, my son, so work hard and focus on education. It's only when I started to think in the language that those opportunities really unlocked for me. I want the system, which is why the white paper is so important, to work for every child to a strong school with a great teacher, for every child at the right place at the right time. To deliver that, the white paper, I think, will go a long way towards that, because that has to be available for the children whose parents don't have the wherewithal or have no parents at all.
Let's talk a bit about that white paper. What is the big idea then?
So the big idea is learn from the evidence. We are about to announce our 10,000th academy, so that's real scale. I have 22,000 schools approximately in England. The evidence is that a family of schools that is tightly supported, really well managed, in a strong performing, and I underline strong performing, multi-academy trusts, because some of them haven't performed as well, but the strong performing ones have delivered outstanding results for the children. And so the white paper will essentially be the roadmap towards getting all schools into that strong family of schools with some really strong targets. So at the moment, only 2/3, 65% of primary school children finish primary school with the ability to read, write and do maths to a good standard. We're going to raise that to 90%. On secondary school, we're going to move the average in English language and maths from 4.5 to 5. Now, that sounds like not much of an ambitious target, because only 0.5 point movement. But actually, it means all children who are doing their GCSEs will have to improve the lowest 1/3 and the high achievers.
If a child falls behind in English and maths, what actually happens?
So if a child falls behind, I have the National Tutoring Programme, which is part of the 5 billion we are investing in recovery. Teachers will actually be able to identify what that is, be able to use the National Tutoring Programme. In the past, it's been the privilege of fortunate parents, wealthier parents. Now it's available to every child. So my message to families watching this at home is, ask your school, are they participating in the National Tutoring Programme? It's a really important programme to help that recovery. And, of course, help us meet those targets.
And you want a longer school day for all schools?
So the average school day is 32 and a half hours. Some schools, thousands of schools, are 10, 20, 30 minutes lower than that. So we want schools to be sort of from 9 a.m. till 3:30. By the way, if it's 20 minutes lower than the 32 and a half hours, that is the equivalent of 2 weeks lost from the school. 2 weeks loss of learning is a big loss, which is why I want every school to do this. I'd like them all to do it by the end of this year, but I know some of them have logistical problems, which is why we've said
Okay.
by next year,
Okay.
they should achieve that.
Now, so you want all schools to have this, not longer day necessarily, but a certain amount of hours in a day. You want better teaching, a promise to intervene if children fall behind. The schools have struggled, haven't they, with years of effectively underfunding. I just want to show this graph that I think we should be able to bring up now. This is the funding gap between state and private schools since the Conservatives entered power. You can see the change of funding, the change of per pupil funding. So you can see there, the blue line is private schools. That's the fees that parents pay per pupil in private schools. The red line is state school spending per pupil, and this is the change per pupil. The dotted line, 2010, when the Conservatives entered power. If you're a parent looking at this, what do you think you would conclude about how the Conservatives prioritise state school pupils?
So you'll remember in 2008-9, that was the financial crash and the crisis that led to us having to tighten our belts and, of course, try and get the economy back on its feet. Thank goodness we managed to do that, because then we got the pandemic, where we've had to spend $400 billion making sure that people's jobs are protected and, of course, businesses are protected. But if you look at the settlement I've just got, is an additional $7 billion by 2024-25. Much of it front-loaded, by the way. So $4 billion of that comes early.
It's effectively restoring per pupil funding to 2010 levels. You've got a lost decade, haven't you, effectively, of growth in funding for comprehensive schools and state school pupils.
But also, as I just explained, we had to get through the financial crisis.
On the backs of
collapsed.
State school pupil funding.
Well, but the important thing is to continue that investment now and deliver. It's not just the $7 billion, by the way. I've got $5 billion for recovery as well. Part of that is the National Tutoring Programme. These are important investments in school. And, of course, teachers have done a brilliant job. If you think of what they've had to come through, including, of course, dealing with Omicron, 99.9% of schools are open. The virus hasn't gone away. We still have 9% absence of teaching staff and support staff in schools. So I'm very conscious that we have to keep continuing to support the teaching profession.
Okay.
The best way to do that is the vaccination programme. And, of course, we had the booster and the announcement that we will now go further with protecting the most vulnerable with a fourth shot. And, of course, making sure that we keep supporting schools through both local directed public health.
You're talking about
and
the pandemic, which obviously had a really very devastating impact on schools. It widened inequality as well. Private schools saw a 12 percentage point increase in A-stars last year. Comprehensive schools, a 3.9% increase. You've said that closing schools, looking back, was a mistake. Was cancelling exams a mistake as well?
So I think the Secretary of State then had very little choice.
Would you have done it?
When the inquiry will look at the decisions made to get the country through the pandemic.
Would you have done it? Would you have cancelled exams?
I don't think he's had much choice.
I don't think you would have.
The truth is that the closure of schools, when I reflect on that, was a mistake, and I'm on record as saying that, and I will do everything in my power never again to close schools, and the Prime Minister absolutely agrees with me, because not just the learning loss, but actually the mental strain on young people, the anxiety. If you look at what the Children's Commissioner has done on surveying 500,000 children, they said actually they really wanted to be back at school. I was at Totteridge Academy last week, and the children said to me, the worst thing that happened to us is having to be at home and learn at home. I saw it for myself with my own child. So I will do everything in my power to make sure we don't do that. And part of the learning to live with COVID is very much around that. But it's the teachers who've done a brilliant job. It's the support staff in schools who've allowed us to get to this position where we can live with the virus.
Closing schools was a mistake. You've got more money for schools, so by implication there perhaps wasn't enough previously. We've talked about the inequality gap. Your predecessor was awarded a knighthood, Gavin Williamson. What was that for? Services to Boris Johnson's leadership campaign, or his record on education?
So, Sophie, I'm going to say something to you, which isn't universally popular, I know, but being in the department, and you see this on my lapel here, it's T-levels, the skills white paper and the skills bill, which is about to receive royal assent, was Gavin Williamson's work. When I was in the department under Theresa May...
So he deserved the knighthood.
Skills was considered the Cinderella part of the department. Gavin Williamson's work on skills T-levels, the lifelong learning entitlement, will transform the fortunes of young people in our country who may not want to go to university. And I think for that alone, he deserves that night.
OK. Now, we're expecting the government to publish its plan for energy next week with a push on renewables. There's a bit of a debate over whether to relax planning laws to allow more onshore wind farms to be built. Now, in 2012, you signed a letter opposing onshore wind. Have you changed your mind?
No, I would say that if we are going to make sure that we carry the will of local people, whether it's onshore wind or nuclear, we have to learn from how it's done well in other countries. And the way you do that is making sure the local community have a real say and want onshore wind if that's what they want to have. But also we've seen great examples in other countries where if they build a nuclear power station within a certain radius of that power station, people get free power. So it's right to look at innovation, to make sure that we wean ourselves off hydrocarbons. We have to do that and have to do it well. Part of that is making sure that we look after the will of the local people.
Just to clarify then, so do you agree with the idea that planning laws should be relaxed to allow more onshore wind farms to be built?
Only if the local community supports having more onshore wind. I think that's the right thing.
Is there a row in Cabinet about this at the minute?
No, there is no row, because we have collective responsibility in Cabinet. We discuss things, and when we agree, we take that agreement seriously, and we have collective responsibility.
Now, energy bills obviously are going through the roof. This is why we're looking at these innovations. Inflation forecast to hit 8.7%. The Resolution Foundation saying that 500,000 children are going to be pushed below the poverty line. Rishi Sunak is going to have to come up with more support, isn't he?
So we are today in a global battle against inflation. Literally, the world is battling this in the US, in Europe. We are too. What does that mean to the consumer, your viewers? When you're in a global battle against inflation, it means the cost of everything from your shopping basket to your energy bills going up. What Rishi did is to say, actually, what has worked is local government know who is most vulnerable. So we've doubled the size of the help
so has
from
he done
half
enough?
a billion to $1 billion.
Do you think he's done enough?
He's put 22 billion for 1 year of help, 9.1 billion of it for energy, and the rest of it is things like making sure that people on universal credit and the taper, they actually keep more of the money.
So do you think he has done enough then?
I think he will continue to keep an eye on this. It's only right. It's irresponsible for me to say, job done, because energy prices are volatile, inflation remains high, so it would be absolutely irresponsible to say job done. But what I would say to you is putting 22 billion to work after spending 400 billion in response to the pandemic is the right thing to do. 1 billion through local government, the universal credit taper. On Friday, the national living wage will go up, which means £1,000 for those additional £1,000 for those most vulnerable. So we have to continue to keep an eye on this. But I think 22 billion in 1 year of help, when you've just spent 400 billion, is the right thing to do.
Now, I just want to end by talking about Prince William's Caribbean tour. There have been a few controversial moments. I think everyone will remember the picture of the fence, Prince William, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, reaching out to kind of touch the hands of some of those children. We can see some of the videos of that tour there. Now, he has acknowledged growing Republican sentiment within the Commonwealth, saying that the trip brought into even sharper focus questions about the past and the future. He and the Duchess of Cambridge, he said, were committed to service, and that, for us, that's not telling people what to do. Do you think this could be the beginning of the end for the Commonwealth?
No, I think it'll be the beginning of strengthening the Commonwealth, because I think, actually, what Prince William, and I know he believes deeply in the Commonwealth, is right to say that people have to decide independently if they want to be part of the Commonwealth family. And that decision will strengthen the Commonwealth, not take away from it, which is why I think he's being very wise and have chosen his words carefully.
OK, thank you very much for being on the programme today. Nadhim Zahawi there.